Hey guys, patch notes have been released. This is big. This is the patch where I'm really hoping we'll shake some things up. There's a lot of changes that I'm expecting. And there's a few decks that I would like to see sort of shifted in and out of the meta. So let's jump into it. So the first things first, Scout has been removed as a generated keyword. This is huge. This is something that we sort of hinted at last week. It looks like it's only Scout that's removed from it, which is really big. So things like Pantheon, and things like Victor can no longer roll Scout as a keyword. So it highly reduces the variance of the outcome of the card. So now, like Arsenal, when you get to like 10 plus keywords, it's not the biggest threat. It's still going to get elusive, overwhelm, challenger, maybe lifesteal, whatever it may be. No more Scout. So that's really big. And then copy spells now count as being played. So now this is a fix to cards like Karma, Taric, and Jace that beforehand weren't. So you get to gain the double up on cards like Jace, where now you can create two things. So now like Lux, yeah, so now Lux doubles and will create two lasers when in combination with Jace or Karma. They'll also count for Ezreal or Taric, which is huge. Which makes cards like Taric a lot better. Obvious buff to Lux Jace. But overall, just a pretty good change that they hinted at the way beginning, and they're finally following up with. So pretty expected changes. Alright, so the first change is to Ashe. This really isn't much of a change at all, but in the past, when you try to say you frostbite a 0 power unit, it wouldn't count as level up progress because you're no longer reducing the attack of the unit. So this is what this statement is for. So now it counts power reduction on units that already have 0 power. So this is a bug fix. And so it also works on things like Formidable. Bard now counts units that buff their own stats. Say what? Now counts units that buff their own stats. We want to open up additional deck building possibilities for Bard and address confusion around what counts for his level up. I'm assuming rather than level up conditions, talk about his origin, which means that cards like the what's it called, like the 2-1 in Ionia, or like the 3-1 in Ionia, oh no, that buff their own stats. Still very confused on what this means. I need to see an example, but if this is what I think it is, then they're opening up the what considers under the origin for Bard, which is probably pretty big. Although right now I'm unsure about the pool of cards, because like does the pool of cards just auto include sign in, and you can play Bard sign in any sort of deck, and then that'd be a pretty big buff, hypothetically speaking. But it says that the counts units that buff their own stats, so I'm a little bit more confused. We'll see when we get a full picture of the card. But overall, this looks like a buff, because they didn't even say anything about buffing Bard, so that was a little bit surprising. Ezreal, you target 8 enemies instead of 6. Oh wow, that's pretty big. So in the they adjusted the difficulty of how easy it is to level up Ezreal, as a compensation for how much easier it is to level him up, because you no longer need a spell to resolve, and you simply just need a target on stack. So this is a pretty significant change, I would say, to Ezreal. It just slows him down a bit. Not super relevant in some scenarios, but still pretty big. Hecarim. Ooh, okay, so ephemeral allies have +3. Instead, when I level up, grant ephemeral allies everywhere +3/+0. Nice. So we want the payoff for ephemeral decks to have consistent by guaranteeing Hecarim's buff on level up, even if he dies in combat. When I level up, grant ephemeral ally. So if I'm reading this correctly, this is like an aura, similar to Zoe, where every time you summon an ephemeral, it will have +3/+0, and not when you summon an ephemeral, I grant it +3/+0. So this is a change that I think a lot of something like Ikeda was suggesting. At least I remember him as being one of the first people to suggest this. But being able to gain this buff permanently is really big. Very interested to see where Hecarim lands after this change. Irelia gets a tune. Oh man. Arcodia is complaining about Irelia not having a tune, or wanting to give Irelia a tune for so long. To kind of compensate for the fact that Flawless Duet costs 2. So now the first Flawless Duet you play costs 1 less, which is pretty sweet. So very cool that I think they're actually taking in like the considerations of what some players slash people in the community kind of suggest, especially things like Hecarim and Irelia. I think these are things that a lot of people are championing as changes, and it's really cool to see them actually being pulled into the game. It's really cool. Callista's a 3/4. Whew. Damn. This is pretty big. Because the difference between a 3/4 and a 4/3 is really big in terms of being able to survive in trades as well as removal, right? A lot of things deal 3, a very few things deal 4. And does this help Callista so much that she all of a sudden comes back into the meta? It seems a little bit uncertain. Still, of course, a fearsome, which is still pretty good. I don't know. Callista's payoff might not still be good enough. Like, there were times where, like, yeah, you could still level Callista, but this definitely is a huge buff to survivability. Does that change the fact that Callista still isn't that great after she levels up, and the payoff is rather limited? Uncertain, but this is a nice, refreshing take to Callista, and we'll really see if the stat line comes in handy. Oh, baby, Shen. What? Oh, I was like, I first read the second part and I was like, why did Shen get nerfed? But now Shen has barrier himself, so obviously he counts himself, so his level up is not nerfed at all, because he'll count himself, and then it's basically, I've seen other allies gain barrier +4 times, but he has barrier himself. Holy moly. Shen's play rate is among the lowest in lore. We want to give him a bit more immediate ability, yup, to attack or block, and give him a little bit combat control. Yeah, wow. Because now, not only, this solved 2 things, right? You can play Shen, and now he's a absolute unit when it comes to blocking, so your opponent has to be very careful at developing into Shen on turn 4. And then when you develop him to attack on the same turn, you don't have to fear him taking like too much damage or like dying in combat through the barrier, or at least, you know, that you'll force out a card from your opponent. This is probably the biggest buff, aside from Hecarim, that we've seen so far. This Irelia buff, you could say, is pretty impactful overall, but we'll see like how much this actually changes the deck. Given that I think Shrima might be seeing a few nerfs as well. But this is probably the biggest change we've seen. Very excited to see where this leads. What? Deal 3 to anything, deal 3 to follow. Oh, okay. So they lowered the cost of Aftershock to 3. So they wanted to change how some of the landmark removal worked, and they wanted to bring Aftershock in line with being able to deal with landmarks. So now they're changing to 3, but now they're taking away its ability to go face. So now it's no longer a burn spell, but it's a 3 mana deal 3 at slow to a whoa, to a follower? So can no longer target champion or destroy landmark. Wow. I mean, I think they gutted this card. This card sucks now. Because yes, it's more efficient at removing landmarks, but now you can't. You basically can't run this card unless you specifically want to remove landmarks. Now you can't use this as a burn card anymore. You can't even use this as removal. Like 3 mana deal 3 to unit is Calibrum, but worse. Wow, I'm very surprised they so heavily took this approach, because I think more realistically it was like spend 3 mana to destroy a landmark and then keep it 4 to deal 3 to anything else, and then it retains its flexibility as a burn / removal card, and then it still has the landmark options. And instead they're taking this more harsh direction is a little bit surprising, because I think deal 3 to follower is really bad, especially at slow. Damn, that sucks. I think that really sucks. Very surprised. Avatar Tides, a 4/6. Well, that was a lot less impactful than I thought. This doesn't change the card at all, I think. I have an Avatar of Tides video coming out tomorrow, and I was kind of preying on the Avatar of Tides buff somewhat significantly impacting how the card works, but it's just a 1 health boost is kind of disappointing. I don't know. I don't think this was ever the main issue of Avatar. Hearthguard to a 5/6. Nice. Viego to a 3/4. Whew. Weren't these the stat lines in the past and they were nerfed back into these? I think it's obvious that Freljord midrange needed a little bit more love, and especially returning some of these buffs back into Freljord could be pretty good, because these stat lines 5/6 and 3/4, given their effects, become pretty darn good. Does this revive Freljord midrange as a whole? Still remains to be seen, but these stat lines definitely do lean in the right direction. Blighted Caretaker back to a 2/1. Same, I see these 3 buffs in the same category, where a lot of these archetypes, so midrange Freljord as well as Aggro SI, are receiving a few extra buffs because they have faded out of the meta, where in the past I think they might have been really solid. So Blighted Caretaker used to be a 2/1, and now they are giving it back, which is a huge change. This change, very impactful, relatively speaking, against the stats for the mana. Now, unless they change other cards like the Curse Keeper, it's only Blighted Caretaker, and it's still missing a lot of the other cards within the Slay/Sacrifice archetype. So unsure if this one card will completely bring back Aggro SI, but these 2 cards are pretty impactful for the archetypes. 2/1 Brightsteel, holy wow, okay, not expecting that. So I Brightsteel Protector, I think, was deserving of some sort of nerf, and it finally received the nerf hammer, but from a 3 to a 2/1, like a whole 1/1 off of it, damn, that is harsh. That is super harsh. Well, I was expecting like a 3 mana 3/3. Some people were saying like 3 1s or 2 2s, but a 2/1, damn. Damn. It's a little bit strange, just given the fact that the Demacia units are generally big for their cost, but the effect is probably still strong enough. It coming down on for 2 mana is probably still good enough, but this card is still really solid for what it does, but its stat line did get really gutted, so really unfortunate. Camavorn Dragon to a 4/4. I guess this is in pair with sort of the Blighted Caretaker. So they're expecting some sort of like Camavorn Dragon, Blighted Caretaker, midrange SI, or like Aggro SI. But like Viego just does that better now. So like buffing these cards is pretty cool, but I just see Viego just being as a superior archetype over these cards. So I don't really see these changes being super impactful either. Chief Nakutak to a 2/4, granting it impact. Ooh. So they're also buffing a few transform cards. I think they have the Magma Lizard in this patch. Chief Nakatak, this 2/4 stat line, again, just very solid at being alive. But now having this boost where they gain impact as well as full healing. The full heal, is that very relevant? It could be. We've never seen this card see play, so it's very hard to evaluate how good this sort of full heal thing is. But of course, at a 2/4, if you can't remove this is a pretty big engine in allowing yourself to value trade, heal, gain the value, and then have impact to kind of roll. Now, of course, there's very few cards that also just transform, and they can only really transform once, except for Gnar. So to say that there's a lot of value might not be that much, but I think the threat of being able to full heal your units is pretty decent. But again, once they transform, they also gain health. So at most, you're like gaining 1 or 2 health. And I think it's more applicable against like flock decks than anything else. So whether or not the impact is super impactful remains to be seen. There's a reason this card hasn't seen play, but maybe the boosts to Magma Lizard will give the transform archetype what it needs. Crumble to 4 mana. Wow. Wow. These are unexpected because it's so bizarre. They nerfed Aftershock regardless of its outside of its landmark removal, but they didn't nerf what Crumble does. Like, Crumble's still 4 mana kill a unit to just kill an ally to kill a unit, regardless of whether or not it destroys a landmark. Whereas, you know, Aftershock pretty much got gutted where it can't go face and it can't use against a champion. Crumble looks kind of nuts because you can't get this off of Telstones. And this is very bizarre to me. Like, if why didn't they take the same approach to Crumble as they did to Aftershock? Or why did this card not get nerfed, but Aftershock did? It's very bizarre. But Crumble, I think, is actually really insane because now it's super flexible because of its claws. And of course, in Shadow Isles decks, you synergize with this kill the ally thing. At 4 mana, all of a sudden, it feels really, really good. 2 mana cheaper than Vengeance. And on par with the Viego spell, whatever it's called, to kill a unit. I think Crumble's insane now, especially because you can get off of Telstones. Wow. Disintegrate. Damage mitigation now prevents units dying from Disintegrate's effects. Okay, cool. So Disintegrate no longer works through barrier, no longer works through tough, as long as you're only pinging a tough unit for 1. So this is a slight nerf to Disintegrate. Probably what we were expecting, and is a lot more in line with how I think we understand how this card works. So it's definitely a nerf, but I think a welcome one to a lot of cases. And in most scenarios, the card is still relatively unchanged. So I think still a very strong card, doesn't really affect the Ezreal Annie archetype too much outside of specifically barrier. Tough, I think Yar saw very little of, and it was really just barrier. But of course, you can still ping the unit after you pop the barrier and it still dies, right? Who knows, maybe with enough Shen in the meta, this is a big nerf because all of a sudden people can respond to this with the barrier card and maybe you don't have the removal. Although that seems bizarrely niche. So Disintegrate, I think, is in line with what we expect now. Ember Monk. 3 mana, 2/3. When you summon another ally, grant me +1/+0. Okay. Interesting. Was this even... I didn't even see this card on the cards that they're buffing. Is this card better? Quick Attack. 3 mana Quick Attack. Is this card good? Bandle City Swarm. So they're nerfing the Phase stuff, which I think we'll get to in a bit. So if they're replacing the Phase Swarm with Ember Monk as like the Lantern engine to apply pressure, is that good? Bandle City already struggled with ways to protect their own units, so having 3 health is pretty susceptible to removal. You'd have to pair this with another region. So Swarm deck, and then you pair it with like another region for protection. Maybe it's okay. It depends on how harsh they nerf like Lantern, because if Lantern's still playable, you just run Lantern over this 3-drop, right? But this is interesting. Depends on Lantern nerf. Pharaoh's Financer 2/1. oncologist treatment, I think very expected. Flaming Lantern into 3-2. Ah, okay, 3-2 Lantern. Is this a big nerf? This, I think, is Aphelios levels of nerf, where Aphelios was a 3-3 and became a 3-2. And to say that, I think it's relatively less significant than most people would think. Yes, dies the Mystic Shot, but the fact that you can still play Pale Cascade and Targon or whatever and have some sort of protection for it, meaning that you still get a -2 discount the same way that this card works, and some decks just are unit based and can't remove it outside of combat, still a very, very big factor in this card's strength. So I think as long as, I feel like this is still heavily playable, maybe you won't lean into it as easily, maybe you won't commit as early on, but I think this card is still very, very heavily playable for what it does, and Ember Monk just pales in comparison. Hothead, 3-3, increased survivability, nothing else. This card is probably still bad, can't really say. Inspiring Marshal to 5-6. Okay, so they haven't, it used to be a 5 mana 4-5, I believe, and then it turned 6. Now they're giving it extra stat boost. I don't think this is like Voice of the Risen already does this, but better. I don't really see why you would also run this card as well. I think we've already seen that Irelia doesn't even need this card. Maybe you can run this as like a, you know, like a one-of tech for later matchups, but like Voice of the Risen already does this, but better, right? It is still at 6 mana. This doesn't really see much play. I don't really think a stat buff is changing much. Justice Rider, though, to a 3-5. I really like Justice Rider as a card. Like, I think what he does is really good, and this is the card that I think the Flash Bomb archetype does really need. The health is good. A 3-5 stat line is a lot better for what it does, but still only one Flash Bomb trap is kind of slow. I would really love to see if, like, you know, the Flash Bomb archetype can lean harder on Justice Rider, but only shuffling one Flash Bomb into the deck might not be good enough. But we'll see. I'm very curious to see where this goes. Kiri, 5 mana. For reducing Kiri's cost, make him a more satisfying build around me card. So he comes down 1 turn earlier. Or at least you can play him 1 turn earlier. But I don't think that like changes the fact that he is a build around card and he hasn't changed what he does. Like, big stat sticks just aren't necessarily the best. And having a pretty heavy build around card where some archetypes use prediction better, like Echo Zillion doesn't run this card, right? And they're one of the heaviest prediction based decks. I don't really see this making a big difference, but it's really cute that they're, you know, at least leaning on some of these archetypes. Lady of Blood to a 3-4. Slower Noxian decks, a bit of a better curve. Scion's not going to run this card. It has in the past and it still won't, but it's cute. Lava Lizard getting impact on the flip. Oh, doesn't change the fact that Lava Lizard is still a 2 mana 1/2, right? So I don't know. This one, like, no, I'm not super impressed. Still just a mediocre card. Legion Deserter only having Fearsome instead of Overwhelm. I think this is just a ode to the Viego because of how fast it can grow. The Overwhelm was just really, really pressuring, and Fearsome is still pressuring for what it's worth, but definitely slows down its ability to deal damage. I like this change. I like this change a lot because in Noxus you already still have ways of giving Overwhelm to a unit anyways. So the fact that this doesn't particularly take away from Legion Deserter's ability, and it still synergizes very well with Red Viego, all of a sudden it's just a little bit less pressuresome, which is nice. Merkwolf Shaman to a 2-4 instead of a 3-3 increasing survivability. It already has Regen. I think this card didn't need to be buffed or buffed for this card to see play, because of course, again, the bigger question was the fact that probably your mid-range didn't see much reason. Like, now this competes for Beard. Beard is a 3-4 and draws a unit without the need to damage the enemy Nexus. Of course, this has Regen as a compensation and is a 4-6 once it transforms, which is pretty big. That's Trundle stat lines for 1 less mana, but has to compete for Bjerg, and it has a conditional thing. So unless this 2/4 stat line makes it so that it's almost guaranteeing itself to draw the transform, then this card is still competing for probably one of the better cards in Freljord midrange. So very interesting to see if this will unseat Bjerg. Because it's also very difficult for midrange Freljord decks to do this outside of their attack turn, which means you're also just developing after your attack turn, which is also kind of awkward. Petricide Broadway, when you summon an ally Grammy Challenger. Okay, so they didn't gut Petricide at all, really, but it now becomes a bird, right? It's the Fleet Feather Tracker effect. But now you can't just like play this on turn 2 and challenge, right? So the days of turn 2 0/3 challenger are no longer here, which is really, really insane. Actually, you know what? This is a bigger nerf than I think I maybe made it seem like, because you can't challenge on turn 2 unless you play like Pesky Spectre or some other 0 mana card. This is huge. This slows down the game a lot. This gives access to some earlier, it allows you to play cards earlier on, but it still is a 2 mana 0/3/4 mid-wall anyways. So it just can't, it'll still deal 3 to your face, but it just won't be able to challenge. Which is interesting because, you know, it's still going to be challenging you on turn 3, turn 4, and then it'll just deal 3 damage. So I think it's still good, but of course, it is a pretty heavy nerf in terms of what this card used to do. But I think still very, very playable. Holy moly. 4 to 6. Damn. 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 Holy moly. What a change. So unfrequently that we see a card getting a +2 mana cost to it. Absolutely crazy. Wow. Well, a lot of times, like, again, especially against Ionia/Shima decks, a lot of times these Promising Future decks would hold up Deny mana. So, you know, you can do this on turn 5 and Promising into Deny. But now it's 6, it's so much hard to do, and you're pretty much almost forced to commit this without having Deny backup, which also means that it's a lot more interactable with, because you can no longer, like, protect it from going off. And against decks that don't have Deny, it's just 6 mana, which slows down your curve tremendously. And you obviously can't weave it into like cards like Sands of Time as easily, and of course Sands of Time is getting nerfed. But this is huge. Wow, this is probably the biggest nerf we've seen in this patch so far. That is absolutely insane. Quicksand gives them -1, but still -4. Okay. So it does the same thing, except when you're targeting 2 units, it only gives them -1 and still disables their positive keywords, which I think is the main part, right? The main part is disabling the positive keywords, and -1 or -2 is just a cherry on top. So this definitely makes it less brutal when you're getting blocked, and maybe it won't be as easy to value block into your units. But the fact is that it still disables their keywords. So slight tap on the wrist for Quicksand, but still a very, very powerful card for what it's worth. Sure. Okay, Player in Terra, you can buff the Stellacorn to 5/6. Sure. Riptide Rex, 7/5, and back to 7. Whew. I didn't even think it needed the stat change, but getting a 7th Cannon Barrage is pretty cool. Nice to see this card coming back. That's sick. That's old Rex with the extra stat boost. Pretty cool. Sands of Time, Instant Sentry is now fleeting. Okay. I like this. I like this a lot. This gives a lot less flexibility of when you're allowed to play Sands of Time, and maybe you're still forced to play Sands of Time as a defensive card, and now you are kind of in an awkward spot because maybe you don't want to count down your landmark, and it's a little bit awkward. This is huge. This really effectively limits when you can play Sands of Time. And on the bright side, I think this is an extra skill intensity to any sort of landmark deck that wants to play this. Speaking to Thralls, it's not like, say you need to like make sure that your Thrall is in a completely perfect countdown setting where you can play Sands of Time beneficially and then still be able to do other things to your Thrall after you count it down by 4. Which I think is really, really cool. It adds a lot more thinking to the deck. Maybe you can't play your Thrall on turn 1, because you need to play Sands of Time on turn 4, and then you want to play like Talia or like Promising Futures on turn 5. So I think this is a really good change. This is really good. Huge nerf, relatively speaking, because it takes away the flexibility, even though the card itself does pretty much the same thing. That is really big. Skier to a 1-2. You want to make... the fact that it's not a 1-mana 1-1 is still, I think, not really helping the archetype. Like a 1-2 still doesn't really change the fact that it comes down on turn 2. I don't really see this being very beneficial, especially being the only difference to the Mecha Euro archetype. So I really wish this was a 1-mana 1-1, but alas, not the case. Arsenal to a 9. So I didn't even know they were buffing the Arsenal, but I think that's as compensation, apparently. So that's interesting. The Prefect to a 2-3. Okay. Huh. That's still not good enough. Alright. Trifarian Assessor to a 4-mana. Oh, wow. So instead of giving a +1 attack, they just reduce its cost to 4. You can use a revert. So this is what it was beforehand. I mean, this is still insane, right? They're definitely giving, especially this Noxus plus Freljord, a lot of love, given the Beard, given the Hearthguard, and now the Assessor. And of course, Assessor can still see play in Reputation decks. Although I think Reputation just likes to have cards like... It's a little bit hard to trigger in Reputation decks, just simply because they have a lot less units speaking, and their units just have a lot less survivability overall. And so like Whispered Words is a 2-mana draw 2 in that deck, whereas this might be a 4-mana 4-3 draw 2 as well. So definitely less impact in Reputation decks as far as I can see, but more impact in the Freljord plus Noxus deck, which is really cool. Freljord Noxus is getting a lot of love here. First play to a 3-3. Sick. What's a patch without a random elite buff? Oh, that's literally what this is. A random elite buff. Don't think this is really big, but cute. Winter hatching to a 4-3. Also don't think this is what the deck... Like, that's not like... I guess it's like a big change, but like, Ionia already has Twin Discipline. Ionia already has the best protection spells. Like, this isn't the problem with this sort of elusive archetype, right? But that's cute. Like, what if you just like play Winding Light instead? And Winding Light you can play on like turn 6 or turn 5 instead of this. I think this card still pales in comparison. Total Contraption to a 4-mana. Alright, just keep you in line with the rest of the landmark removal. Just discount by 1 more. Still a bad card. I don't know. Whoa. Grant Overwhelm this round. That is such an aggressive take to how to nerf this card. Wow, that's huge. Yes, you still get the psych ability of this card. Yes, you still get the faded proc, but now only giving Overwhelm for the round. It makes it a lot harder to play this card early on. And now you have to think about whether or not you want to play this card to cycle your deck to find another Zenith Blade, or if you want to play this card like later on in order to get the most value out of the Overwhelm, which also means that you have to develop on your turn in the late game to play Zenith Blade, in which case in the past you could play Zenith Blade on a defensive turn and then open attack with your unit. This is such a huge nerf. Holy frick. Wow, that's insane. What I say was the biggest nerf? This has to be like the second biggest nerf. I forgot what I said was the biggest nerf. But that is huge. Wow. That's huge. And that's the last one. Champ skins. Nami Tidecaller with the cute animation. Sick. Bard. that is the greatest skin I've ever seen. Finslayer. Oh my god, 3 epic champions with level ups. Monk Lee Sin, Zillion Woodwine. Oh, that's pretty sick as well. Riftmaster Darius. These are pretty sick. Okay. So that's all the changes. There's a lot to take in. There's some really heavy changes too. Zenith Blade, super impactful against Faded. Like the Pantheon archetype is getting gutted for sure here. Like insanely gutted. Wow, this is so insane how insane the nerf this is. Pantheon, definitely a huge loser of this patch, which I think a lot of people were hoping for. And now Faded still is a problem, or the same state as before, but Zenith Blade, such a huge nerf. It's insane. Like, you no longer Zenith Blade on turn 4 on your card, and I have to figure out some other buff. This is so insane that I don't know if like you can still run this card. So crazy. Insignificant, probably insignificant, probably insignificant, pretty good, probably insignificant. Already got semi-gutted, but sure. Insignificant, really, really insane. So Thralls definitely getting hit, double hit, especially really, really toughly. Although I think this card might be a little bit less nerf compared to promising features, but definitely still very, very impactful. Riptide Rex, cool. The 7th Cannon Barrage might give it a lot more pressure. Insignificant, not as significant as I think people might expect. Really, really insane change. Really, really insane change. Probably not as significant, not that insignificant, but relatively speaking, probably insignificant, probably insignificant, probably insignificant, probably insignificant, although I really wish it wasn't, so probably insignificant, probably insignificant, probably less impactful than people think, less impactful than people think, probably insignificant, relatively big change to how the card works, but still very powerful nonetheless. Really, really insane. I fail to see how this card is good. Still, probably insignificant. Pretty significant, but it's not going to change the fact that decks that still want to play this will still play it. Probably insignificant, pretty good, and pretty good. Probably insignificant. I view this change pretty negatively. I have no idea why they went this way. Really significant. Unsure. This is the only card that I'm leaning towards unsure about, because I don't know if Kalissa's payoff is good enough for her extra survivability. Pretty significant, just straight up buff. Like, any card that receives a straight up buff is just insane anyways. And the Irelia is already a really strong archetype. Hecarim, really significant change. Unsure if this is what Ephemeral is needed, but the fact that removing Hecarim doesn't change how the Ephemeral allies work is really, really big. Significant, but probably not as significant as most people would think, but still very, very big change. I have no idea what this means yet. I need to figure out what this means before I can give you guys a fair reasoning, but it looks like they're opening up Bard's Origin to include other cards. I just don't know what cards count in this pool. Maybe we'll open the game and see if it's live. And then Ashe, sure. The changes to Karma, Tarek, and Jace, very significant. I want to, very quickly, I'm just going to look at Bard, because I think he's the last card I want to look at. But it's really cool. I think there's some significant changes, especially nerfs, to the cards. And the buffs, most of them are relatively insignificant, but there's definitely a few archetypes that are receiving a little bit more favoritism than the others. So really quickly, we're going to jump into the game, look at Bard, and then we'll call it a video, because I've already been talking for 40 minutes. God damn. Whew. Okay, let's hurry this up. Hang on, let's just make Bard. What? Huh? We want to open up additional deck building possibilities for Bard to address the confusion around when counters level up quest. Now counts units that buff their own stats. Oh, okay, so this I think now puts in line so cards like so while it didn't open up the pool of cards that Bard counts for, cards like Bark Beast I think will now count towards Bard's level up. So there is a wider pool of cards that also do count for Bard's level up. Whether or not this is impactful for Bard's different archetypes remains to be seen. I think relatively not, because I think the Demacia and Ionia are still the best cards for it. Otherwise, this is just a straight up buff for cards in those archetypes that did work for this. But Bard's Origin is still very narrow. Doesn't really change Bard. How my opinion on Bard hasn't seen any nerfs to Bard, which I'm a little bit sad about. But overall, I think some pretty significant buffs overall. Very excited for Hecarim. Very excited for Shen. And then maybe Noxus, or maybe Freljordian Midrange. But let me guys know what you guys think of the patch. Let me guys know what you guys want to play afterwards as well, and maybe what you want to see on the channel. But thank you guys so much for watching. This has been your patch notes review by yours truly, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace out, guys.